I read a book last year called Super Communicators by Adam Grant, and he was looking back at some research from the 1970s and 1980s, and it was a huge, huge research project. There were all of these researchers and psychologists, and in the 1970s, for a lot of reasons, divorce started skyrocketing, and so they wanted to kind of figure out what was going on, and so they looked at thousands of couples, and they would bring them in and they would study them and videotape them, and most of what they did was provoke conflict. And over time, studying these people across years of time, they categorized them broadly into happy couples and unhappy couples. The happy couples ended up staying married, happily ever after, and the unhappy couples, the majority of them either ended in divorce or just lived in absolute misery. And the job of the research project was to find out, what is the difference between these happy couples and these unhappy couples? They knew it had something to do with conflict. Now, if you're in a really rough marriage right now, you probably have fantasies about what a good marriage is like. And you think in a good marriage, they hardly ever fight. And when they do fight, they just kind of hold hands and kind of talk it out, as they skip through meadows or something like that. And if you're in a really good marriage, then you know that marriage is actually kind of hard. And you might imagine that people in unhappy marriages, they just fight way more than you. And it's way more brutal. They don't have near the skill that you have in problem solving. And both of you would be wrong. So the most obvious thing they looked at first was, we bet the unhappy couples fight way more than the happy couples. And they were dead wrong. There was no correlation. There were some happy couples who fought a couple times a month. There were some happy couples who fought every single day. There were unhappy couples who only fought every, couple of months. There were unhappy couples who fought every single day. There was zero correlation between the frequency of fights. So they thought, okay, well, we were wrong about that. Maybe the unhappy couples fight about way more serious issues. They're fighting about their finances. They're fighting about how to raise their kids. They're fighting about religion. They're fighting about their in-laws. They're fighting about their debt. They're fighting about their careers. And the happy couples, they're fighting about who looks better. No, you look better. No, you look better. No, I love you more. It's maybe that's the difference. So they looked through all of their research, and what they found shocked them. There was zero statistical difference between what people fought about. The unhappy and happy couples fought about the exact same things. So then they thought, okay, you know what it probably is? Here's our hypothesis. We think that the happy couples just have way, way better problem solving and conflict resolution skills. They know how to compromise. They know how to set boundaries. That has to be it. And they were wrong again. As a matter of fact, some of the worst problem solvers in the entire experiment were the happiest couples. So they were very confused, and you might be as well, because it starts to destroy the notion of what makes a happy and unhappy marriage. It wasn't the frequency of fight, it wasn't the category of fights, and it wasn't even the skill in resolving the fights. So what did make the difference? Hold that thought. I want to go to Jesus, because what the researchers were trying to figure out 50 years ago, Jesus solved for us 2,000 years ago. This is part of Jesus's most famous sermon. It's all his greatest hits. It's his most distilled wisdom. And here's the 3 verses he says about how to deal with conflict. He says this: why do you look at the splinter in your brother's eye, but don't notice the beam of wood in your own? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take the splinter out of your eye, and look, here's a beam of wood in my own? You hypocrite. First, take the beam of wood out of your eye, and then you'll see clearly to take the splinter out of your brother's eye. This is Jesus 2 millennia ago, figuring out what psychologists figured out 50 years ago. The difference between the unhappy and happy couples and how they engaged in conflict boils down to one question: who am I trying to change? Who am I trying to change? Every fight is a struggle for control. You think they're being lazy and you want to change that, you're trying to control them. You think they're being rude and you want to change that. You are trying to control them. You want more intimacy. They want more money. You want more time away. They want more time at home. You're trying to control each other. Remember, the happy marriages and the marriage that ended in divorce, they fought just as frequently about the same topics. They were equally skilled or unskilled at resolving the conflict, but here's what they found. Unhappy spouses tried to control each other. Happy spouses focused on controlling themselves. This is literally what Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount. He said, why do you look at the splinter in your brother's eye, but don't notice the beam of wood in your own? He's using this ancient framework where the eyes were the source of discernment. Your eyes being clear was a picture of you being able to apply wisdom into your life. And so what he's really saying is, when you go into conflict trying to control the other person, you're focused on the splinter. And you may know this is like one of the most proven out psychological phenomena, that the things you wrestle with the most about yourself are the things you hate the most about other people. So if you're prideful, you cannot stand to see a splinter of pride in somebody else. If you're insecure, you can't stand to see someone else grab the spotlight. If you're bad with your money, you will be the first to judge someone making an illogical purchase. Who are you trying to control? Who are you trying to change? Because for a lot of us, we get into these fights, especially in our marriages, and you can see the splinter. You're like, oh girl, if you could only fix this, girl, you got some pride going on, and I'm gonna pray for you because you need to change. Jesus needs to get a hold of your heart because I can see it just clearly, and I'm gonna poke at that splinter and prod and point that splinter out until you finally get rid of that splinter in your life. And the whole time, she's looking at you like this. You're like, girl, if you could just fix your splinter. It's kind of cartoonish, but the actual picture that Jesus is using is maybe like 1/100th of this and a telephone pole. He's using like cartoonishly opposite examples. And what it really does is it blinds us. It's like, I'm not even seeing what's wrong with you. I'm seeing what's wrong with me projected back on myself. You've got like a little issue, but I've got like years of trauma I haven't dealt with to even be able to discern what's going on in my marriage right now. And it sounds so cliche to say, you gotta start with you. This is a radical reshaping of how we approach conflict. We enter into tension, a fight, an argument, conflict, and here's our disposition. We say, in our mind, I am right, and I will prove it. And of course, the problem is, your spouse is also entering into the Colosseum saying, I am right, and I will prove it. I am going to change you. And this leaves us no choice but to go in and try and control and coerce and change your spouse, whether through fear or manipulation, or passive aggressiveness, or withholding. You want to fight for your marriage, you're going to have to change your approach. What Jesus is calling for, what Proverbs 15 is calling for, is not, I am right and I will prove it. It is, something is wrong and we will fix it.